Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur, Parsha's Tazria Metzora, double Sedra. And tonight I've got actually just one idea on the Parsha and then one idea on the Haftorah. That will keep us busy for this evening. Two very interesting ideas, but I want to focus a little bit more on the Haftorah, which is just fascinating and some very interesting things to discuss. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com and I'll send you the handout. If you take a look at the first box, we're working through the Pesukim in Parshas Metzora. The Pasuk says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron leimar." Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe and Aaron, "Ki sovo el Eretz Canaan, when you, Klal Yisrael, come into Eretz Canaan, asher ani nosen lachem la'achuza, v'nosati nega tzoras b'beis Eretz achuzaschem." Then I will give you the sort of halachas of Negoim and Tzoras will be operational, and there could be a nega and a blemish, this spiritual malady, this spiritual blemish that appears in the house. Ubo asher lo habayis, and the owner of the house will come. V'higid lakohen, and he will say to the kohen lamer, saying, "Ka nega nirli babois." A nega has appeared to me in the house. It doesn't say nega; it says ka nega. Seemingly, a nega has appeared in the house. V'tziva hakohen, and the kohen will instruct. Or pinues habayis, he will tell him to empty out the house, b'terem yovei hakohen, before the kohen actually comes along and takes a look at the nega to actually ascertain whether it is a blemish or not. Liris is nega v'lo yitma es kol asher babayis, because he wants to make sure that all the kelim are out of the house before he proclaims it tomei, to save them becoming tomei. V'achakach yovei hakohen liris habayis, and once the owner of the house, the balabais, has emptied out his kelim, then the kohen will come along and inspect it and make the declaration if he deems it to be a nega. Let's just do a few of the Rashis. It says Rashi, "Kanega nirli babayis." Rashi is picking up on the word kanega. It doesn't say nega, but kanega. Afilu Talmud Chacham, sheyodea shehu nega, vada lo yifsag dovel borer lo iman nega nirli. Even a Talmud Chacham who knows the halachas of Negoim inside out, he is not able to say nega nirli with certainty that a blemish has appeared to me, ella kanega nirli, but only it seems like a nega appears. B'terem why? We'll see why in the Maharal in a second. B'terem yovei hakohen, before the kohen comes, he should empty out the house. Says Rashi, "Shekol zman she'ein kohen nizkak lo, ein sham teras tumah," because before the kohen has proclaimed this nega, there's no tumah yet. So quickly take out all the kelim, and then the kohen can come and inspect the house. V'lo yitami kol asher babayis, she'em lo yifnu v'yov kohen v'yira hanega, because if he doesn't take out the kelim and the kohen comes along and inspects and sees that it is indeed a nega, nizkak li'soga, you're going to have to close it off and contaminate it. For kol mashe b'soicha yid, when everything comes inside, is tomei. And Rashi goes on and explains which kelim are we talking about. Torah, what is the Torah concerned about? Imal klishetef, if it's just a regular, if it's just regular metal kelim, you can be tovel them. And they become tomei. They become Torah after you tovel them. So we're not worried about that. Imal oichlin mashkin, if it's food or drink that he needs to take out, he can eat them when it's tomei. That's not a problem. They're not going to go to waste. The concern is klicheres, earthenware, clay vessels, she'ein lohem tara b'mikvah, which cannot be toveled and become pure in a mikvah. Now, the Gur Aryeh, the Maharal, says something very interesting. He's commenting, of course, on Rashi and says, "Shafilu chacham gomor." He explains Rashi as follows: "Ein hatam she'im yoyma nega nirli bebayis yekol shebayis tomei." Doesn't mean that if the Talmud Chacham, who is an expert in Hilchas Negoim, comes along, and he's not a kohen, and he comes along and says that nega nirli bebayis, this is a nega, it's going to work. Tevada ein tumah shel bebayis rak al pi kohen. The only person who can declare this a nega is a kohen. Avol tam hador. So why does the pasuk say kanega nirli? El tam hadova is because of the reason is because the pasuk in Tehillim says doiver shekarim lo yichain. Someone who speaks lies, untruths, lo yichain, it won't be established. It won't have any firm setting. Because until the kohen comes along, it will not be considered a kohen. That's Rashi in the pasuk Lamed Vav. Because it might not be true. So the best you can say is kanega nirli bebayis, not nega nirli bebayis, because it's not properly a nega until the kohen comes. So the best the Talmud Chacham can say is kanega nirli bebayis, this looks like a nega, which is fascinating because it could be that the Talmud Chacham is way more versed in the halachas of Negoim than a Kohen. And it could be that the Kohen is not sure, and the Talmud Chacham is saying to him, look, I've studied Hilchas Negoim, and this is a nega. And he can whisper in his ear and say, this until the Kohen says, this is Tomei, this is a nega, nothing doing. It's a Gezeres HaKosov. So you can have Rabbi Yashiv and Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky telling this Kohen, this is a nega, until the Kohen actually declares it, nothing doing. And that explains the context. But what you see from here, says the Gur Aryeh, is that you've got to be honest, you've got to be truthful. And the Pasuk therefore says that when the Talmud Chacham declares Kenega nirli b'bayis, that's the appropriate expression, because nega nirli b'bayis is just not true, because it's not a proper nega until the Kohen does it. You see from here the importance of being honest, and your words should be absolutely true. There's a fascinating sefer, Shimon Finkelman, the sefer on the Chavetz Chaim's Sfas Tomim and Shem Olam, Lessons in Truth it's called. And he's got here a few stories I just want to share with you. The first story he quotes Rabbi Frand. Rabbi Frand often said this story, which is a very powerful story, just to emphasize the importance of speaking truth and being honest. Listen to this. I'll read it from the book. A man came to his Rav with a troubling question. Rabbi, I don't understand. I come from a very distinguished religious family. I'm quite learned, and I'm meticulous in observing every detail of halacha. Now, Mr. So-and-so, as you know well, is a simple man from a simple family. He keeps what he knows, which is not very much. Yet I have not merited to see nachas from my children, while every one of Mr. So-and-so's children is a gem. Can you explain this? Are you prepared to hear something painful? Asked the Rav. Yes, the man replied. You entered the business world with nothing, and worked very hard to be successful. But your approach was not at all straight. You would bend the rules to accomplish your goals. You could say one thing and mean another. That's what your children saw, that nothing really means anything. However, Mr. So-and-so, as you said, is a simple man. Yes, simple and sincere. I am certain that he has never told a lie willfully. That is what his children saw, and that is why they are the way they are. Honesty and sincerity are keys to a good life in both worlds. Another story. This is, again, this is on page 5 of this book, of Shimon Finkelman. He tells the following episode. Baruch Feldman, a fictitious name, owns a healthcare facility on the East Coast. A government audit revealed that he had overpaid $100,000 in taxes. A few weeks later, he received a government check for that amount. 2 weeks later, he received another check for the same amount. Mr. Feldman immediately called his accountant. Upon looking into the matter, the accountant concluded that the second check had been issued in error. Mr. Feldman, he said, the decision is yours. Chances are very slim that anyone in the government will ever realize the error. So if you deposit the second check, you'll probably have no problem in keeping it. Of course, you're not actually entitled to the money. Mr. Feldman left the room, and upon returning after a few minutes said, I discussed the matter with my partner, and we decided to return the money. The accountant was well aware that the only partner Mr. Feldman had was HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that he had left the room to ponder privately what Hashem would want him to do in such a situation. He concluded without a doubt that the right decision was to return the money. So just two notable stories about the importance of truth, and that's really one of the points that emerge in the Parsha, not nega nirli b'bayis, but kenega nirli b'bayis. Okay, now let's turn to the Haftarah, and this will be the bulk of the Shiur. This is a fascinating idea that I saw in the writings of Rabbi Emanuel Bernstein in his wonderful Sfarim on Chumash. And he's got everything I'm going to share with you I've seen in this Sefer, but I went to the sources and they're on the sheet. So first of all, we need to just go through the Pesukim in Melachim Beis Perek Hey, to give the background to the story. Of course, it's the famous story when it's Tazria Metzora, it's the Haftarah of Metzora, and it's the story of Elisha, Naaman, and Gehazi, and the 4 Metzoraim. Let's go through the Pesukim just to give the background. So I'm reading now from Perek Hey, Melachim Beis Perek Hey, Pasuk Tes. Vayovei Naaman besusoi berichbei vayamid Pesach habayis leElisha. So Naaman, who is the famous general, he was an arrogant general of Assyria, he came and approached the Novi of the day, Elisha. Vayishlach elov Elisha malach lemar, and Elisha sent out a messenger saying, halach v'rachatz t'sheva pa'amim beyardin, because Naaman had soras, and therefore he tried everything, and they told him, go to Elisha, he's the Novi of the Jewish people, and he'll be able to deal with your soras. And Elisha didn't come out to greet him. And he sent out a message and said, go and bathe in the river Jordan 7 times, and then your flesh will become normal again, and you'll and you'll become pure. You'll be cleansed. Now, Naaman was a very arrogant man. Naaman became incensed, and he went. He said, he had the audacity just to send out a message. He didn't come to see me, the great Naaman. The Parsha continues, Halutoiv Amona Uparpa, the rivers that we have, Amona and Parpa, Naras Damesik, Mikol Meme Israel. Why should I go to the river Jordan to bathe there? Are not Amona and Farpar, the rivers in Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? And Halu Erchatz Bohem, I already bathed in them. V'Taharti, have I become cleansed? Vayifen Vayelech Bechema, and he turned and went out in a fury. Vayikshu Avoda Vayidabre Lo Vayomru Ovi, Dova Godel Hanovi Diber Lecha. His servants approached him and said to him, that Ovi, my father, has a prophet to ask you to do such a difficult thing. He just asked you to dip in the river Jordan. It's not such a big deal. He acquiesced, and therefore he went and he was tovel in the Yarden Sheva Pamim Kedvar Ish Halekim, like the man of God had spoken. Vayoshav Besore Kipsarnar Kotzen Vayitar, and his flesh became like the flesh of a young boy, and he became cleansed. And he realized that Elisha was right. It worked. Vayesh Vayoshav El Ish Halekim Hu V'chol Machaneu. So him and all his entourage went back to Elisha. Vayamad Lefono Vayim Hinei No Yadati Ki Ein Lekim B'chol Haaretz. There is no God in the whole world like your God, etc., etc. So, and then the Pesukim carry on. And then in Pasuk Chaf Aleph, he says to him, he says, Vayirdef Gecha, sorry, I've jumped the line. And then he offers him, he says to him, let me give you a gift. I want to give you some present to thank you. And Elisha refused. And he said, he pressured him to take, and Elisha refused. He wouldn't budge. He's not taking. He refused. Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Now jumping. And Gehazi ran after Naaman, because Gehazi, who was the attendant of Elisha, he quite fancied those presents that Naaman had offered Elisha. So Vayirdev Gehazi, and Gehazi ran after Naaman, and he said to him, Vayir Naaman Ratzachra Vayipol Melach Berkov, and then Naaman saw that Gehazi, who was Elisha's attendant, ran after him, so he quickly got off his carriage. Vayome Hashalom, and he greeted him, and he said, "Is all well?" Vayome Shalom Adoni Shlachani Lema, all is well, and my master, i.e. Elisha, has sent me saying, Zeh boi elai shnei norim, we've had guests, and we've changed our minds, and we'd like the gifts now. Of course, Elisha said no such thing. But Gehazi wanted to have the booty, wanted to have these gifts. And then the parrot continues and says that he took the gifts and he got all these gifts. He came home and he hid them away. And then Elisha said to him, where have you been? What's going on? And Elisha was so upset when he obviously knew, and he was so disappointed and upset with Gehazi. He gave him a klala, he gave him a curse of tzoras. He says, "Tzoras Naaman tidbak b'cha." The tzoras that Naaman had, tidbak b'cha, that Naaman's leprosy shall stick to you, v'zaracha, and your children la'olam. Vayetzim in the fun of Metzora kasheleg. And then when Gehazi left the presence of Elisha, he was as white as snow with leprosy. Now that is Perek Hey in Malachim Beis, famous story. Our Haftorah kicks in 2 prokim later in Perek Zayin. The pasuk says, "Va'arba anoshim hoyu haMetzoraim." Pesach Shah, there were 4 Metzoroim at the entrance outside the gate of the city. And that's the whole story of the Haftorah. The 4 of them were sitting there and they said, "Look, we're in big trouble. and what are we sitting here until we die? We should really try and go in, and that's the story, Ayin Sham, the story of the Haftarah. But I just want to pick out one question, which is a fascinating question, which we'll deal with in three different mahalchim. You see, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, who were these four Metzorahim? The Gemara says, Arboa Anoshim Hayu Metzorahim Pesach Shar Amar Rabbi Yochanan Gechazi Shloisha Bonov. It was none other than Gechazi and his three sons. They were the Metzorahim who were sent chutz lemachaneh, outside of the city of Shomron, where they were. This is where this all took place, and they were Metzorahim as a fulfillment of the normal practice of Metzorahim. Now, here comes the fascinating question. The Mishnah in Kalim, I think it is, says, Ayoras hamukafas chayma mukudashas mimeno shemeshalchin miteichon es hametzoraim. That the Ayoras hamukafas chayma, walled cities. There, one of the halachas of a walled city is that you send the Metzora outside the walled city. Says the Bar Tunura, Ayoras mukafas chayma mimos Yeshua ben Nun. They've got to be walled cities from the time of Yeshua. To be Metzora ksiv, because in the Sedra, in Parsha's Metzora, our Sedra, it says, Mechutz lemachane Moishava, Chutz lemachane Yisrael. Or Kibesh Yeshua es haaretz, and when Yeshua conquered the land, Kiddush ha'yarash shayu mukafas chayma, he conquered the land of the walled cities, biyomov in his day, shayu kamachane Yisrael, ishtalech misham Metzoraim. So the rule is, you only send a Metzora out of a walled city, which was from the times of Yeshua ben Nun. And therefore, many Achronim ask the question, this is not a walled city from the times of Yeshua ben Nun. Take a look at the Avas Yonason, for example. This is Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz in his Sefer on the Haftarah of Parsha's Metzora. This is the second box on the second page. Hinei Kasha, I've got a question. Lama shalchu leMetzorim halalu chutz lemachaneh. Why did he even send these Metzoraim outside of the camp? Halo ein kedusha b'Shomron, because there is no kedusha in Shomron. Ki hi eina mukefes chayma, because it's not a walled city from the times of Yeshua. Could Amrin and Lama Zocha Omri lemalchus? Why did Omri, one of the Malchei Yisrael, merit to become a king? Shehoisif ir achas beretz Yisrael, because he added a city. So the straightforward implication is that Omri added this new city in his day, which is well after the times of Yeshua. And therefore this city of Shomron is not a walled city from the times of Yeshua. Like we said in the Mishnah just now, that if it's not walled from the times of Yeshua, you don't send Metzoraim out of it. Therefore the question is this. In our Haftarah, which begins that there were four people sitting outside of the city, that's how our Haftarah begins. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin identifies these four as Gechazi and his three sons, as per the story I just mentioned. Why were they outside of this city? The rules of sending out a Metzora outside of the city do not apply to walled cities which were not walled from the times of Yeshua. You only send out a Metzora from a city if it was walled from the times of Yeshua. The city of Shomron was way later. That's the question that the Avas Yonis and Eibeshitz ask, and others ask as well. Now, Rabbi Bernstein in his lovely Sefer presents three answers. Let's go through them. The first is Rabbi Kiva Eiger. There, it's Kalim. In the first parak of Mishnah's Kalim, in Taisus Rabbi Kiva Eiger, he says the following. Take a look at the first box where it's in C1. Hiksheli Chacham. Rabbi Kiva Eiger doesn't identify who asked him the question. He says a wise person wants to ask him. To Pirish Rashi in Melachim Beis Perek Zayin Al Haftarah. Gimel Perek Pasuk Gimel. Pesach Hashak K'meshenema Mechutz Lamachane Meishavei. VaHaShomron Lo Hayu Mukaf Achim Meis Yeshua ben Nun K'mavu Melachim Aleph, etc. So therefore, why were they sent out of the camp? V'hishavti loi, and I responded, says Rabbi Kiva Eiger. Denizha bozeh targum yonisum pasuk hanal. But if you look carefully at the pasuk in the beginning of Melachim Aleph, it says Vayiken es hahar, i.e., when Omri took this city of Shomron, it says Vayiken, he bought it. Targum yonisum v'zobin yoskarchi, he bought the city. V'hainu desvirle mituch kirsanal, because the Targum is very much addressing our question. In other words, Shomron was a walled city from the times of Yeshua ben Nun. It's just that when it didn't, not that he built it, not that he he built it in his day, but rather he bought it. He bought a city which was walled from the times of Yeshua ben Nun. Etc. So one answer that Rabbi gives is that it was indeed walled from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, and when it says Omri built the city of Omri, it doesn't mean that he actually built it, but rather he acquired a city that was previously walled. That's one mahalach. So he built and fortified the city, but he didn't build it from scratch. The second mahalach, the second approach, is that of the Meshech Chochmah. The Meshech Chochmah says a very, very interesting answer, that Shomron was built by Omri. In fact, that is the mashmois of the Pesukim, I suppose, that it was built, and therefore it was not walled in the times of Yeshua ben Nun. And therefore there was no halachic requirement to send a Metzora out of that city. So we're back to our question. Why did they send out these Metzoraim from the city if there was no need to? The reason the 4 men were sent out, says the Meshech Chochmah, was based on much less noble considerations. The northern kingdom, there was a split, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom of Israel declared Shomron as their capital. And the goal in doing so was expressed by the Medrash. The Medrash says in the Tanakh Eliyahu, you've got Yerushalayim, which is the capital of the south. Shomron will be the capital of the north. And therefore, to establish Shomron's status as equivalent to Yerushalayim, they applied all the laws of Yerushalayim to it, including sending out the Metzora. So therefore, it was, as Rabbi Bernstein put it, a politically conferred sanctity, a politically conferred Kedusha, but not a halachically conferred Kedusha. Why did they send them out? Political reasons. We want to give Shomron the same status as Yerushalayim. That's what Meshech Chochmah says. Lokach ksiv Pesach Hashash Oyinag Malchi Yisrael B'Shomron Kedushas Yerushalayim. It's a very nice, a very neat answer. Now there is a third answer, and that is the answer given by Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz himself in Ahavas Yonasan. Take a look at the penultimate box on the page. Yesh Lema. The Trei Minei Negahem. Says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. There are 2 different types of tzaras. The Nega Nochri Eina Matami Ki Im Hi Chayli Hamidbekes. You see, what our Parsha is talking about, and tzaras generally, is a spiritual disease, a spiritual malady. But there is another type, which is Nega Nochri, which is real leprosy, which is a medical condition. Ki Hi Chayli Hamidbekes, which is highly contagious. V'lokach korah hakos of machla, mashe'en kein Nigei Yisrael. That's why the Pasuk calls it a machla of Naaman, and not Nigei Yisrael. V'yodua de Gechazi ubonov hoyu b'hem tzoras Naaman. What was the klala that Elisha gave Gechazi? The klala was that you will have tzoras Naaman. Tzoras Naaman v'Naaman hoyu nochri. He was a non-Jewish person. V'hoyu chayli hamidbekes. What he cursed him with, what Naaman had, was not the tzoras that our Parsha is talking about, but it was a physical, medical, contagious disease. And therefore, when Elisha cursed Gechazi with tzoras Naaman, it was that which he received. And that's why he wasn't really Tomei. And halachically speaking, they were allowed to go into the machaneh. It's only the spiritual nega of tzoras that forces you to be sent chutz l'machaneh, of course, of a walled city. However, why did they send them out? For a medical reason. They were in medical quarantine, not for halachic reasons. And that, says the Margolius Hayom, Reuven Margolius, in his comments on Sanhedrin, he says a fabulous postscript. He says, that the 4, our Haftorah begins that the 4 Metzoraim were sitting talking to each other, saying, why should we wait until we die? I.e., they were talking to each other. But the Gemara in Zvach in Kufid Zayin says, Bodod Yeshev, Metzoraim, a proper Metzora who sent out of the camp, has got to sit in solitude. So how come these 4 were talking to each other? Ve'ech Yoshvu Yachad. Says the Margolius Hayom, because this was a physical, like the Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz is saying, this is a medical, physical disease that they had, not a spiritual one. And therefore, on the contrary, all four of them were sitting together because they were in quarantine together. Amazing. So therefore we have just a bit of a slightly different focus on today's shiur, that three answers to that question. So let's just summarize what we've said this evening. Number one, the Parsha of Tazria Metzora deals primarily with the halachas of Negoim and Tzoras, and in the Parsha we have the whole story of how the Negoim in the Batim unfold, and the Pasuk says that a homeowner would say, Kenega nirli babayis. Says Rashi that even a Talmud Chacham can't say Nega nirli kenegani. Explains the Maharal, because it's based on Dover Shekarim lo yichein, that a person's got to speak honestly, and therefore a Talmud Chacham, he may be able to identify the Negoim very clearly, but until the Kohen says it, it is not a proper Nega. So the best he can say is Kenega nirli, the importance of being honest, as per the two stories that I mentioned. And then the fascinating Haftorah. The background to the Haftorah is, of course, the whole story with Naaman, very arrogantly refusing to listen to Elisha until he was persuaded by his servants. He then dips in the River Jordan 7 times. He wants to offer Elisha grand prizes, his gratitude. Elisha declines them, and even though Naaman tries to force him to take it, he resists taking any present. But Gehazi, he covets them, and therefore, unbeknownst to Elisha, he runs after him. He takes the things, and Elisha finds out and gives him a klala. What's the klala? The klala is v'tzoras Naaman tidbak b'cha v'zarecha. You and your children will have this contagious disease, this disease. The question is, if they were indeed Metzoraim, how come our Haftarah begins Arba Anoshim Hay Metzoraim Pesach Hasha? They're not halachically required to leave the city because it's not a walled city from the times of Yeshua ben Nun. The Mishnah says in Kelim, and says about Tanura and others, it's just got to be, there's only a walled city from the times of Yeshua. So why was there a need to even send them out? So three mahalchim that we've come across. Number one is that Rabbi Kiva Eger says that Shamron was indeed a walled city from Yemos Yeshua ben Nun. And when it says Vayikan Omri, it means that Vayikan Esahar, it means that he built and fortified the city, but he didn't build it from scratch. It was an old city from the times of Yeshua. He sort of refurbished it, as it were. The second approach is that of the Meshech Chochmah, that it was for political considerations. That in the northern kingdom put Shamron as their capital, and they wanted to sort of give it the same sort of equivalent status as Yerushalayim, and therefore they applied all the laws to it. It was a politically conferred kedusha, not a halachically conferred kedusha. And then the third answer is that of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. Fascinating that there are different types of negoim. This was on a halachic negoim, tzoras, but rather it was a physical, medical one, and therefore, as the pasuk suggests, it was negat of Naaman, tzoras Naaman, and therefore that they were sent out of the city not for halachic reasons but for medical reasons. They were in quarantine, and says the Reuven Margolis Hayom, that explains why they were all sitting together, because if it was halachic, there's got to be bothered yeshiv, they're all sitting in solitude. But the fact that it was medical means that they could sit together. It wasn't a halachic one. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you.